Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks to those of you who are joining us today for our webinar, Ready or Not, Preparing for the Changing Landscape of Data Privacy Regulation. Hope you're having a wonderful sunny Wednesday. My name is Jeff Cook, Marketing Specialist here at SmartSimple. All right, so before we begin, there are just a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to cover. This webinar will be recorded and a recording will be made available afterwards. You're most welcome and encouraged to ask all your questions over the course of this webinar by typing them into the Q&A or chat section of the Zoom webinar console. We'll be sure to address all your questions by the end of this webinar, granted we have enough time. All right, so for this webinar, I'm joined by Megan Keogh, Business Analyst here at SmartSimple. Hey, Megan.
Hi, Jeff.
So since joining SmartSimple, she's worked closely with various departments in our international operations to prepare and comply with data privacy regulations like the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, which became enforceable this past May. And here's what the agenda looks like for today's session. We'll start off with a brief overview of SmartSimple software before we dive into speaking about how the landscape of data privacy laws like GDPR is changing and how companies need to rethink their processes for ensuring compliance. From there, we'll then touch on some compliance features you should see in your software that supports your business processes and ways to future-proof your compliance as data regulations continue to evolve. We'll then wrap things up with some Q&A. So let's get started. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about SmartSimple software. We've been in operation for over 15 years, offering configurable cloud-based corporate social responsibility, grants management, and employee engagement solutions used by not only Fortune 100 companies, but also private, community, and corporate foundations, as well as local, state, and federal government agencies across the globe. We often say that our clients come to us for the technology, and they stay for the relationship, being one of the only vendors in our space, offering live technical support 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. So from our perspective, what makes us stand out among others is our perfected balance between technology and support, which we're confident you'll be pressed to find elsewhere. Our unique approach has led us to build a tight-knit community of over 300 clients who support over 150,000 users every month in nearly 200 countries around the world. And just really quickly, I'd like to speak about our security and compliance posture here at SmartSimple. So you can see that SmartSimple is an advanced technology partner with Amazon Web Services, along with several competencies. We're SOC 1 and SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, as well as a holder of authority to operate with the U.S. federal government, and our GSA Schedule 7D approved. Adding to that, our technology supports GDPR compliance and robust security protocols such as multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, and FIPS 142 cryptography. All right, so hopefully that gives you a better idea of what SmartSimple does. Now, this is where I'd like Megan to begin setting the foundation of this webinar on how the landscape of data privacy laws are evolving in a post-GDPR world. All right, take it away, Megan.
Sure, Jeff. So privacy has been at the top of mind for organizations and individuals as of late. As technology rapidly grows in its ability to serve us, it's also grown, quite frankly, in its creepiness, and consumers have taken notice. According to the Toronto Star, a reported 90% of Canadians expressed some level of concern about data privacy, and 74% of Canadians felt that they have less protection of their personal information now than they did just a decade ago. In Canada and the United States, we've seen several calls from citizens to adopt privacy law to meet, or at least come close to, the standards enforced by the most restrictive and far-reaching privacy law to date, the General Data Protection Regulation. And lawmakers are taking note. The global GDPR effect is undeniable, with California passing the California Consumer Privacy Act and Brazil's Senate passing its inaugural data privacy law called LGPD, or as it's often referred to as GDPR Lite. The Lithuanian Parliament also just released a new law called the Law on the Legal Protection of Personal Data. We can also expect many countries and U.S. states to follow suit.
Great. Thanks, Megan. So I'm pretty sure that many of you joining us today are familiar with Europe's GDPR regulation. Maggie, can you provide us with a quick refresh on what everyone needs to know about GDPR now that we're seeing other jurisdictions referencing it for their own data privacy laws?
Sure. So GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it was passed by the EU in 2016, but it became effective on May 25th of this year. It was designed to protect the data privacy of EU citizens, give them unprecedented access and control over their data, as well as aiming to reshape the way organizations approach their customers' data in the first place. The UK Information Commissioner Elizabeth Denham says it all boils down to accountability. This law affects organizations globally. Since it focuses on the data subject, any organization who processes the personal data of an EU subject needs to comply. So what does processing mean? Here are some of the key words in the law. Processing means any operation or set of operations which is performed on personal data or on sets of personal data, such as collecting, recording, organization, structuring, storage, etc. Personal data means any information relating to an identified or an identifiable natural person, which is the data subject. This could be anything from their name to their IP address. So there are two bodies that are being held accountable for complying with the law. They're the data controller and the data processor. So the controller refers to a person who determines the purposes for which and the manner in which the personal data are processed, whereas the controller is any person other than an employee of the controller who processes personal data on behalf of the data controller. So in this case, SmartSimple is the processor while our clients are the data controllers. Each body has tons of added responsibilities under the law. So now that we've gone over the scope and the terms, here's what GDPR sets out as their processing principles. Data should be processed with lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Second, with purpose limitation, meaning that data should not be processed further than the initial purposes. The next is data minimization, which means ensuring that you're processing data that is necessary for the original intended purpose. Following that is accuracy, which means that data should be kept up to date and ensuring that inaccurate data is rectified. The next is storage limitation. Data should only be kept for as long as it is necessary. There should be no data hoarding. Next up is integrity and confidentiality, which means protecting against unauthorized or unlawful processing. And the last one is accountability, which means that being able to demonstrate compliance is a must. The law also covers new requirements for consent collection, especially for children. There's also various new rights that are given to the data subject in relation to their data. The main ones being of concern are their right to be forgotten or erased, their right to accessing their personal information, their right to transparent information about the data that you have on them and why you're collecting it, as well as the right to object to your processing of their data. Data controllers have to be prepared to respond to any of these requests. There are also increased requirements for data breach reporting, and an important one for us is the idea of privacy by design, meaning that data privacy should not be an afterthought in any system.
Great, thanks Megan. So now that we've covered the basics of GDPR and the basis of most upcoming privacy laws, can you help us understand the impact new legislation will have on companies who may be considering this?
Sure. So since the law is so theoretical, its practical applications have left many, even legal professionals, in disagreement. We can expect from litigation over the next few years to understand more about how the GDPR will be enforced, and best practices will develop from that. But until then, organizations have been left scratching their heads, so to speak, unsure of whether what they're doing is enough, and more importantly, how this affects their day-to-day activities. So in this little section, we'll be discussing some business processes that are affected by privacy laws, the main areas of concern for some of our clients, as well as risk management. So privacy law forces us to rethink what we've always done. The step a lot of our clients have been taking is mapping out their data, evaluating their business processes, and analyzing their business purposes. It involves asking questions like, what are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? What is the specific business purpose for collection? Could we possibly fulfill that business purpose without this information? Where will our data be going? Where is it being stored? And how long should we be keeping it for? These are questions that require involvement from all areas of an organization. Not only is legal involved, but grant staff, program managers, IT, marketing, as well as HR. In fact, after initial preparations are complete, compliance to privacy law relies heavily on non-legal but technical staff, as they'll most likely be the ones who are actually executing the policies that legal has created within the system. In various discussions with our clients, we found that most of them seem to be worried about practical applications of their privacy policy, such as how do we make sure that we're only processing the data for the specific business purpose that we collected it for? How can we make sure to effectively and completely carry out the data subject's right to erasure should they request it? And how do we manage old data in our system? Common business purposes require rethinking. And once the new requirements are developed from that rethinking, a technical solution is imperative. Here are 3 examples of business processes that are affected by GDPR. The first is data retention. So let's say an organization's privacy policy states that they'll delete the data of an unsuccessful grant application 5 years after the application submission date. Now this seems pretty common, but what are the chances that this will fall to the wayside? Who is responsible for deleting these records? The margin of human error for a manual deletion might be higher than we'd like. It's imperative to completely automate this process. In a more complex data management framework, the organization might have said that they'll only keep information for as long as they need it. Now, after they've mapped out their business processes, they've decided that no longer needing it means that once the application is rejected. The business requirement has then been set. Purge unsuccessful grant information X amount of time after the application has been rejected. Now it's up to the software, the second tier of compliance. Can they execute that requirement? Can they execute data retention policies based on the business purpose data map? We can get even more granular. The organization might want to keep contact information from the applicant for 5 years after unsuccessful application, but delete the financial information and/or highly sensitive information like a social security number. Can the vendor tailor highly specific data retention policies to different categories of data? These requirements can vary from organization to organization, but the vendor should be flexible enough to completely automate your data management framework that your organization creates. The second example of a common business process affected by privacy law is consent collection. This is a big one. If organizations can't prove that the information they've collected is according to the consent requirements laid out in the applicable law, then their data is considered unlawful. An organization might decide, for example, that they'd like every user to agree to their privacy policy, ideally before they submit personal information. And if they don't agree with the privacy policy, then they shouldn't be able to submit any information or even access the system. Now, taking this requirement from a legal guideline to a technical reality, can the vendor deny access or submission based on agreement or disagreement with the policy? Can the vendor impose the privacy policy agreement before the user is given the option to enter personal information? And more importantly, do they have advanced options for informed consent? Can they add tooltips or inline information explaining why a certain field might be necessary or how you'll process this information? Lastly, can consent be tracked and reported on? The final example involves collecting potentially sensitive information and adequately securing that information. Say your company is running an employee volunteering program as part of your CSR initiative. You may be collecting an abundance of sensitive information on the employee profile, such as t-shirt size, dietary restrictions, if they need special assistance. Moreover, their volunteering interests may reveal their political associations or religious beliefs. This is data that is considered to be a special category according to the GDPR. It's imperative to keep this special information secure end to end. There are countless ways that privacy law might impact your business's unique processes, but making sure a vendor is flexible enough to execute the requirements will be key in future-proofing your compliance. Ultimately, preparations for privacy law are a matter of risk management. A cost-benefit analysis might be necessary when deciding if you need to make any investments in technology. The obvious risk of non-compliance is the hefty fine of 4% global revenue, or 20 million euros. Organizations might think that they're small fish in comparison to the likes of Google, Facebook, and companies poised to receive the largest fines. But the risks extend far beyond fines. Often, in the philanthropy space, organizations are collecting sensitive data on sensitive populations. When building your data map, ask yourselves if there is any information in your system that acts only as a liability without serving any business purpose. High-impact data breaches like the Equifax breach provide a really interesting case study on how the acts and omissions of few can have immense implications on many. According to the New York Times, the former CEO of Equifax said, "The Equifax data breach, which exposed the sensitive personal information of nearly 146 million Americans, happened because of a mistake by a single employee." Mr. Smith referred to the individual in Equifax's technology department who had failed to heed security warnings and did not ensure the implementation of software fixes that would have prevented the breach. Privacy and security is something that should be automated as much as possible to avoid situations where the integrity of a system or your organization's compliance depends on one person alone. The margin for human error is the biggest risk in compliance.
Excellent. All right. So, Megan, would you mind telling us a little bit about what makes technologies companies may be using in their business processes already compliant, and what sort of answers they should expect from questions to their technology vendors?
Sure. So compliance is a shared responsibility with 3 tiers to it as we see it. The first tier is you, the client, and your business processes. The next is technology. So does your software have tools that help or hinder your compliance? And the third is having a compliant tech provider. Now, we've already discussed the business process side of this in detail, but another aspect of your compliance, the first tier, is making sure that your staff are knowledgeable about privacy law, IT security best practices, making sure that they're knowledgeable about your own processes and requirements, etc. Ideally, data privacy would become a priority internally with investments of time, effort, and education. The next tier is technology. After you've made the necessary changes to your business processes, you've updated your privacy policy, you've mapped out your data, you want to make sure that you're actually executing all of this. Since most of the first tier happened offline, the second tier is about bridging the legal and the technical, making sure that if someone audited your system, they'd be able to see that you're doing exactly as promised. Technology can hinder your compliance when it's not robust enough to actually carry out your requirements. Here are a few ways that your technology can hinder your compliance. The first is if it doesn't allow for a sophisticated permission structure. The only option is a hierarchy, not a matrix. This possibly puts one person in the position of too much responsibility, sort of like the Equifax example, as one person did not receive the appropriate request, so 146 million people were affected. The second is if they don't offer tools to help you organize your data according to business process or category of data or however else you've organized your data. The third is if they don't offer clear ways to differentiate what is personal data and what isn't. Questions you can ask a potential vendor include, how will you help us meet requirements for consent? How will you help us meet our requirements for the data subject rights? How will you help us maintain our data according to the processing principles? And how will you help us carry out our privacy policy? Hopefully, they'll have thoughtful answers to these questions and tangible solutions. More importantly, the vendor should be providing you with ongoing support on how to use these security and privacy features in your system effectively. It's not enough to have the tools if the education around them is insufficient. Also, be wary when vendors state that they have GDPR compliant software, as this doesn't exist. Vendors can have tools to help you with your compliance, but it will never be a magic fix. Finally, The third tier is your software provider. So making sure that your software provider is compliant, ensuring that you have contractual arrangements and that you're doing your due diligence as a controller. Remember that it's the controller's responsibility to make sure that they're using processors to comply with the regulations. Here are some things that you should ask for. The first is, have you implemented technical and organizational security measures? If so, what are they? You could ask them for recent copies of their audits. You can make sure that you're entering into a contract with them regarding processing. You can ask them if they are processing your data in a country that wasn't deemed an adequate country to transfer data to by the EU. If this is the case, you can ask them what transfer mechanism they have in place. And next, you can ask them if they're following or plan to follow an approved code of conduct so that they can prove their compliance. Since so much of an organization's compliance depends on its processors, look for commitments not just on paper but in practice. Is their system growing with the new legislation? Are they continuously making enhancements in the field of privacy and security?
Alrighty. So I think the last portion of this webinar speaks to how companies can future-proof their data management, security, and compliance amidst all these changes.
So solution is future-proof when it has the flexibility to change along with upcoming legislation. GDPR will not be the last privacy policy with implications that pile up on our desks, which makes organizational and technical agility essential. Of course, Equifax wasn't future-proof because they weren't diligently checking and updating their technology and applying correct security fixes, allowing one employee to expose the data of nearly half of the US population. This is why SmartSimple has introduced a security audit and a privacy review for our clients, where we investigate how you're utilizing the security and privacy features to ensure that your data framework is being executed optimally. All of our privacy features were developed with the goal of long-term compliance. It's not enough to achieve, but to maintain. Frequent health checks are a key for success. The reality is that most systems built more than a few years ago were not built with privacy law at the top of mind. So managing your personal data, data governance frameworks, consent, and overall compliance will be easy with the following features. Our on-demand security audit and privacy review, as well as advanced consent tracking, our personal data field tags through implementing data categories, data retention policies, data security policies, as well as advanced pseudonymization options, which ensure that the integrity of your information is not hindered by deletion. So no matter what your complex requirements are, SmartSimple will implement your privacy policy and your business processes into a fully automated solution. SmartSimple wants to automate as much of the compliance process as possible to eliminate as much human error as possible. So there were multiple components that together led to the Equifax breach, but ultimately it boiled down to a communication issue. SmartSimple certainly has highly sophisticated and safe software, trusted by clients to process the data of hundreds of millions of people in 15+ years. And we certainly have features to help you, but it's not enough to have the right part. This is why we pride ourselves on our support 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, as well as our highly knowledgeable privacy teams. According to Elizabeth Denham, having the right mindset towards data protection helps to future-proof a business. It will put it in the right place to keep up with the legislation.
All right, so at this time, we'll open it up to anyone who has questions for Megan about what we've discussed. Once again, please ask any of your questions by typing them into the Q&A or chat sections in the Zoom webinar console. I'll give you a few more moments to type up your questions. In the meantime, we have one here. Okay, so what is pseudonymization and why would we use it instead of just deleting our data?
Okay, this is a good question. So pseudonymization is used to help prevent the identification of a data subject through rendering the identifiable aspects as unidentifiable. So ways to do this could include using a false name, changing keywords or data into a randomized set of numbers, or our approach would be masking them through asterisks or whatever value you'd like. The reason that you'd want to do this instead of deleting might be because one reason could be because of reporting obligation. So if your organization needs to do long-term reporting on your granting, you might decide that you don't need to keep all of the information on the grantee's profile, but only a few key details about the award. So you might want to pseudonymize the identifiable details about a person and just keep the key things that you actually want to report on, whereas deleting the profile entirely might lead to holes in your reporting later on. I hope that answers your question.
Right. Great question. That's also a hard word to say, pseudonymization.
Very.
Took me a long time to practice that one. All right, so we have one more question here. Didn't know about California's new privacy law. Where do you recommend beginning?
Another good one. So I'd say a good start would be reviewing your business processes. You can do this through reviewing our workbook, which we created, that includes questions to ask internally. Hopefully that would lead you to the right direction on what you might want to consider. After that, I'd recommend getting some training. So at SmartSimple, we had several internal presentations on the law to make sure that everyone is on the same page and everyone can pitch ideas or considerations regarding their respective departments. After that, I'd recommend creating an internal task force and starting to develop a privacy policy based on the law. I think that's a good start, but there are tons of resources online to help you with these things as well.
Excellent. So haven't seen any more questions come in, but I just want to be conscious of everyone's time as we approach the half-hour mark. So thanks again for everyone who contributed so far. We're happy to answer any questions you may have afterwards from the webinar via email. So please do send those. I'll provide an email address that you can address those to on the last slide. All right, so time for a shameless plug. Just before we wrap up, I invite you all to take advantage of our GDPR and compliance-related resources available on our website, especially our GDPR portal, for everything regarding that regulation, including a downloadable GDPR self-assessment workbook that Megan just referenced. Visit smartsimple.com/GDPR.html. You'll also find other helpful compliance-related and GDPR-related content on the SmartSimple blog, accessible at smartsimpleblog.com. All right, so thanks everyone once again for taking the time out of your day to join today's webinar on preparing you and your company for the changing landscape of data privacy regulations. If any of you have additional questions for Megan based on what she's discussed today on privacy, security, compliance, feel free to email us at gdpr@smartsimple.com. On the other hand, if you'd like to schedule a demo of SmartSimple's comprehensive suite of CSR solutions for corporate giving, grants management, employee giving programs, contact us at sales@smartsimple.com or call us toll-free at 1-866-239-0991. I wish you all a great rest of the day. Thanks again for visiting us again, and a wonderful weekend ahead. Bye now.